Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I am from Romania. My English is not that good, but I hope someone will read what happened to me many years ago. This is my story. I was in the army. The year was 2003 at the end of September. Me and another soldier were guarding a big deserted hangar. We were supposed to make 4 hours each, guarding that is. When one of us was guarding for 4 hours, the other was sleeping. My colleague was on duty and I was asleep. Suddenly I woke up like I had a bad dream. I was sweating. When I looked at my colleague, he was fast asleep, snoring. The time was around 2 a.m. in the morning. At 4 a.m., I was supposed to start my shift. Anyway, I started to try to remember what I was dreaming. Why did I wake up so confused and sweating? Then I heard a noise outside. I rushed to see what was happening, without thinking to wake up the other soldier. I looked around, and at a distance of 30 meters there was this pack of dogs, which they were from our company, who were barking at something behind a small hill. So I rushed in that direction to see what was happening, but when I got close I heard a growl and all the dogs, 7 in total, freak out and run away. I stopped walking towards them and wondering about what could have been. At one moment I was thinking that I was still dreaming, when 2 of the dogs came near me. It was what can be called the alpha of male and female dogs of the pack. Their look was like they were in need of help. Honestly, I was thinking of going back to the other soldier and tell him what happened, but my instinct told me that I needed to find out what that thing was. So, I started walking with these 2 dogs, when suddenly I saw them. About 10 meters in front of me, there was a black mass, like a semicircle, 2 meters long and 1 meter high. I stood there, baffled for a few seconds. Then I talked with my dogs and said, "Go, let's see what's over there." And she, Girly, like it had understood what I was saying, went to that shadow and started barking at it, real close. After a few seconds, that mass rose up, and Girly ran away as fast as she could, although it hadn't touched her. Now, this shadow was standing 4 feet, like a dog and not a human. It turned around and hopped over a bush in 2 seconds. It was massive. It looked like a giant hyena. Long front legs and short behind legs with a small tail at the end. The head was also that of a hyena. All of it was black. After some time, when I just stood there wondering what I just saw, I came to my senses and came back to the other soldier. I told him what I saw. He didn't believe me, but he agreed to come with me in search of that thing. We searched it together, this time with all the dogs present, but didn't find anything. Before we went, we called the HQ to inform them of what was happening, of what I saw. The response was that I just saw a boar, and I needed to leave it be. After that, me and the other soldier went back to our post. He went back to sleep, but I could not forget that figure. So, I went outside again, although all my instincts said not to do this. Again, all the dogs were nowhere to be found. Just the alpha dog, the male. Spike. He was worried. But he had confidence in me, so he tagged along. We walked about 100 meters away from the post, playing with rocks. I threw them, and he would bring them back. Everything was normal. That black mass was nowhere to be seen. Maybe it was just my imagination, I started thinking. At one point, I threw a rock as far as I could so that Spike would go in search of it, and I wanted to go back to my post. But then it happened. When I turned back, that thing was there, behind me. Less than 5 meters away. Now, I could see it more clearly, although it was still a black mass. It was about my height, 1.70 meters, with long ears, like a donkey. That was the first thing that I noticed. More massive than a dog or a boar. That's for sure. The body, as seen in the dark, from the front looks like that of a horse. Other than that, I could not see any characteristics. No teeth and no eyes. I was in a trance, trying to communicate with that thing. It was unreal what was happening, and I still said to myself that it was my imagination. Then Spike came along. He just stood there beside me, looking at that thing. Like he didn't know what that was, or what he needed to do. Then, I don't know what came over me, but I shouted as strongly as I could. It simply vanished.
My very first experience was when I was about 14 years old. I was hanging out at my friend's house and we had just woken up from a sleepover. I was about to go home. When I was 14, my parents were separated and it was my mom's week to have me. My mom lived in a different neighborhood. My dad lived in the same neighborhood as my friend. I walked to my dad's house to get some sketchbooks that I had left at his house. I wanted to bring them to my mom's house. I went up to the side door of my dad's house to unlock the door. Went inside, went up to my room, and grabbed my book. As I went down the stairs, I just got this sudden feeling of dread and sorrow. I was about 5 steps from the ground and I looked at the wall where the side door led outside. There was a window maybe 2 feet to the right of the door, but in between that was just a wall. But at that second I saw a huge black shadow move as if it were walking. It looked more like a reflection of someone walking on the other side of the kitchen, so I looked over and there was nothing there. I looked back at the wall. The shadow was just standing there. I sprinted out the door and locked it. I could never be in that house alone again. My second experience occurred at my mom's apartment when I was probably in 8th grade or so. This experience ties into 2 different things, so I'll give the whole story. When we were going to get the apartment, we wanted to know the history of the building because they told us we would have to wait a week to be able to go in. They had to repaint the whole apartment and lay new carpet down. Legally, you have to supply information on the history, but they refused to tell us why they had to change everything out. The building was not that old either. It was maybe 10 years old, a very nice apartment complex. So on that note, we moved into the apartment, and a few months later my mom was alone in the apartment when I was at my dad's house. She freaked out and told me,
I was laying facing the bathroom and I opened my eyes and saw a little girl in a nightgown sitting on the edge of my bed. She got up and walked into my bathroom and disappeared. I'm so scared.
I thought that was pretty freaky since she was alone. Then a few weeks later I was home with my brother after school and I was in his room talking to him and went to go into my bedroom on the other side of the apartment. While I was walking through the hallway, I looked at one of the pictures hanging on the wall. You could see the reflection on the glass of the edge of my mom's bed. I only saw a quick glance of it since I was walking, but I saw a man in all black sitting on the edge of her bed. Then I walked backwards and looked at the picture frame again and saw him standing at the door. He was wearing an all-black tuxedo and had a blacked-out face with bright white eyes. I turned around very fast and nothing was there. I ran into my bedroom and didn't come out until my mom came home.
While in college, I lived in a fraternity house for a couple of years, 2011 through spring 2013. It was an old house, probably built in the mid to late 1800s, that had housed a variety of families, fraternities, and sororities over the years. Of course, being an old Victorian house, it had its quirks and noises, but generally speaking, you would never be alone as guys were always coming and going. On the rare occasion that a brother would be alone at night, they would always talk about hearing or seeing things. In fact, one new member always said that he saw a person follow me up the stairs and refused to ever sleep there again. I had always chalked those stories up to it just being an old, creaky house with shitty lights and insulation. Until, at least, this series of events happened to me. My first year in the house, I roomed with one other brother in a northeast corner room, and there is one particularly important detail about that room. On the roof outside of our north-facing window there was a spotlight that lit up the letters on our house just next to those windows and also shined into our room. One particular night, my roommate, his girlfriend, me, and my soon-to-be boyfriend were all bedding down for the night. It was college, so 2 couples sharing a room regularly was the norm, and we left the spotlight on for some reason so there was a glow to the room, basically like if you leave the curtains open during a big full moon. As I'm falling asleep, I watched this black mass, almost like a cloud, move from the southeast corner into the northwest corner. So I watched something move diagonally across the room towards the spotlight, eventually disappearing into the spotlight. Normally, I would have just figured that I was seeing things as I nodded off, but this time my almost boyfriend sat straight up and said something like, "What the EFF was that?" That was followed by my roommate's girlfriend asking, "Did you see that black thing too?" 3 of the 4 of us seeing the same thing definitely confirmed to me that I wasn't just seeing things as I fell asleep, something was in that room that night. Now that night may have been the first time I saw the black cloud or ghost, but it wasn't the last. The next year I was vacuuming the upstairs hallway alone, while everyone else was cleaning downstairs. As I turned around I saw something come through the attic stairs doorway and move into a bedroom. This startled me a bit, so I went looking for whatever brother had clearly tried to scare me. The problem was that I was the only person up there, every other room was empty and it obviously wasn't a person because the attic door never opened. Also during that year, I encountered that same black mass while taking a shower. The mass passed through the bathroom door and then out the window on a west to east path. Now the thing with that bathroom is that there were 2 sets of lights. One was in the shower above your head and one above the sink, which is diagonal from the shower to the southeast. The placement of the lights ensured that any shadows would get cast behind you while in that room. So for me, while taking a shower, my shadow was below and to my right on the shower wall. The mass that moved was chest level and to my left. And shadows certainly don't move the way this thing did. During that same year, I had my own room in the back corner of the house. It was mostly unremarkable as a bedroom, except every so often there would be a knock in the middle of my south wall, a wall that was on the second story and only reachable by ladder. But we never had a ladder around, and this only happened on quiet nights. Finally, I have this super odd thing that has happened virtually all my life. If I sleep in a house that has had some sort of trauma occur there or it's thought to be haunted, I will have this one reoccurring dream, or rather nightmare. A hooded figure will drag me throughout the house and no one is able to help no matter how much I fight and scream, and usually I wake up screaming. I bring that up because while living in the fraternity house, I had this dream once a month like clockwork for 2 years. We found out later during a homecoming weekend while talking with 2 alumni who had gone to our college that during the late 80s or early 90s, a sorority was in that house and one of their sisters died in a car accident at 19 or 20 years old. From that point on, members of that sorority claimed to have had encounters with her ghost. So that's the story of how I went from a non-believer to a maybe, probably believer. Now I don't know if it's the sorority girl who died or not, but that house is haunted.
There is a motel called the Nordic Inn up in Dorset, Ontario. My father stayed at the very end unit that looks like a cottage in the pic. He built cottages and stayed in the unit for months. I do not believe that unit is rented out, but my dad worked something out with the owner. He told stories very rarely about what he experienced in those months staying at the Nordic Inn. Pots and pans flying right at him. Old books with old writing he couldn't make out the language hidden within the lodge, random cold spots. He spent most of the time there alone or with my stepmom time to time. Whatever was there started fucking with him personally and he had to cancel some projects and relocate. The cottages he built were massive and he needed an extra helper from time to time to prepare and bring material. He was a stonemason, so he and this Ukrainian free on board stayed in the lodge. That's when the entity started to get into his head. He would have recurring dreams that involved his mother. He would be laying down in bed back in his old apartment when he first came to Canada. Lakeshore Road near the Christie factory, and he would hear his mom call out to him from the other room, "Go to sleep, my son. You've been working very hard and you deserve rest." She kept going on with comforting words and he explained it as feeling serene and nostalgic. He then started feeling something crawl up his bed and then onto his chest. That is when he started to choke and he kept hearing, "Open your eyes." He eventually did and he saw the black mass. He let out a few peeps and squeaks which woke up the other helper who fell asleep on the sofa. He called out to my dad and the black mass jumped off him and stood in the doorway. He said it looked similar to what a swarm of gnats or mosquitoes looked like, had only a simple figure and stood about 4 feet. He got about 2 seconds to look at it and it jumped on him again until the helper made his way upstairs to my dad's room. He explained the dream and what he saw to the helper and he was shocked because the helper was having the same exact dream but said that he woke up from it because a picture of Mother Mary fell over in his back home dream room. It happened once again 2 nights later, but it switched from my dad to the Ukrainian guy and they left the lodge middle of the night and stayed at a nearby trailer park. He tried to inquire with the owner about what the hell was going on in that lodge, but the owner seemed sensitive to the subject, possibly not wanting to draw negative news and affect business.
My friend and I had spent the day geocaching in the woods. The orienteering game where you look for containers hidden in various locations. The sun started to go down, so we figured we would get back to the road and do one more at a nearby parking lot. When we arrived at the coordinates, we saw that we were at a church, and that the cache was hidden on the side of the church, in a yard surrounded by tall crosses. At this point the sun had mostly disappeared and it was dark outside. After approaching the area and reading the clue, it was clear that the cache was hidden behind the Mary statue on the right side of the yard along the tree line. With phones in hand, we both pointed our flashlights over to the Mary statue, and immediately this large black mass shot straight up from behind the statue and through the trees. The trees blew up as if a large gust of wind had hit only that one spot, with everything surrounding it remaining unmoved. I can only describe it as a roundish smoky black ball that was fairly large. And I can't tell you why, but it seemed evil, aggressive even. Her and I took one look at each other and without a word ran our asses back to the car as fast as we could. Afterwards I'm like, "Did you see that?" and she's like, "Did you see that?" Honestly, if I had been alone I would have tried to rationalize and say my eyes had been playing tricks on me, but she was there and she saw it too. Needless to say, we didn't find the cash. To this day, it's one of the scariest things I've ever experienced, and one of the few things I can't explain. Even with all my Google searches, I only come across results for shadow people, which is not what I saw. I have always described it as a black mass, and I'm glad to see here that other people have experienced this. I knew we couldn't be the only ones.
From late 2003 to summer 2005, my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, and I lived in a haunted apartment in the Lakeview neighborhood of Chicago, by the corner of Melrose and Broadway. When we first moved to this apartment, I often felt like I was being watched and sometimes had a sense of unease. But I was young, 23 when we first moved in, and a senior in college, so I blamed the feelings on stress and the layout of the apartment, which was a typical Chicago 4+1. We were on the second floor right over the garage, and our living room window faced the living room window of another apartment. That apartment and mine almost always kept the blinds shut. At the time, I did not believe in the paranormal. I'm the sort that has to see something myself before I believe it, and once I do see it, I analyze it endlessly. I went to bed one night, but as usual could not fall asleep quickly. Our 2 cats normally went to bed with me, but they didn't on this night. After a while, I sat up in bed and looked out the bedroom doorway. I can see the dining room area from bed, and if the cats were playing, they would inevitably end up in that area. Our apartment was very small, maybe 700 square feet if that, and the dining area was kind of central to the apartment layout. I hoped I would see them so I could call them to me. It was dark, but not pitch dark, because the apartment's windows let in dim light from our neighbors across the way, as well as typical large city light pollution. So, thanks to this light, my eyes quickly adjusted to the gloom. That's when I realized there was a very dark black, the blackest black you can think of, blacker than black, even, like velveteen tar, mass just past where the apartment's very brief hallway ended and the dining area started. It was around 7 feet high, and had a rough head and shoulder/torso shape, but the rest of it kind of faded off. I wasn't alarmed at first. If anything, I leaned forward to try to get a better look, because I absolutely couldn't believe my eyes. I was baffled. But when I leaned forward and gawked at this thing, it seemed to turn and look at me, and when it did, I saw 2 red eyes in the head. I did not see any other features, and I don't remember if the eyes were glowing or just plain red, but they were indeed red. When the thing looked at me, my amazement was quickly replaced by a deep, primal fear. And then it swooped through the bedroom doorway and towards me. I did the only thing I could think of, and that was duck under the covers like a kid hiding from the boogeyman. I have been in some scary situations in my life, but that particular fear was almost unearthly. The feeling reminded me of the intense terror you feel when you realize the monster in your nightmare has spotted you. After several moments, I began to run out of air beneath the covers, so I decided to elbow my sleeping husband in the ribs hard enough to irritate him and make him wake up/sit up/roll over/do something. It worked, and when he didn't react strangely, I figured the thing was gone, and it was. And later my husband saw the shadow again, but it never appeared remotely as threatening. Altogether, I saw the spirit there 3 times. It took me years to come to terms with this experience. The closest explanation I could come to was sleep paralysis, but other than the apparition looking similar to some of the hallucinations reported during sleep paralysis, there were no similarities to sleep paralysis. I had yet to fall asleep at that point and was able to move freely. The fact my husband later saw a black mass during waking hours, and I saw something else when I was awake, also helped me come to the conclusion that what I experienced wasn't due to sleep paralysis. I sent a message to the property management company asking if anyone has ever reported anything related to a haunting or the paranormal. I had a hunch that the spirit moved throughout the whole building versus staying in my apartment, and I fully expected either a no or no response from them. But to my surprise, the guy responding said he would check with people in the office and get back to me. A couple days later he said, "Actually, I've been told that they were aware of the situation, but haven't had any reports of strange activity in a few years. Hope this helps."
Location: Central Oklahoma in a town called Mustang. Family sightings: my father never admitted to seeing it, and he was the only one else living there at the time, though he is very tight-lipped. He did, however, become extremely concerned when we had the sightings and would often sit awake downstairs with his shotgun, which is wildly out of character for him. My older sister has seen a large hairy biped creature in the trees when we were younger, actually before my friends and I had our experiences, though hers was during the day and was at a distance of about 200 feet. Current state of the woods, I actually now own a house that is to the rear of the other property and shares the woods, but no one has had any experiences of that kind in a good decade. Did it feel malevolent? It gave us all a distinct feeling of predator versus prey when we saw it. Like an instinctual feeling of dread, like we were being stalked. It supposedly struck a school friend of mine one afternoon, and while I did see her fall sideways as if she had been hit and there was a large 4-digit shaped red mark on her shoulder, I can't say anyone else has ever been directly attacked by it. She was also not one of my friends who was around very often and only had the one experience. Beyond that, we had our 2 sheep disappear a few days apart from one another, and then a few days later everyone woke to a large crashing noise. In the morning we found our rabbit cage. A concrete and metal structure of at least 500 pounds had seemingly been lifted and thrown about 20 feet from its original location, and it was destroyed. We found no signs of the rabbits. Later that day we were all on edge, so we searched the property and eventually came across the 2 sheep laying side by side at the bottom of a ravine. A 20 feet drop or so, with both of their necks broken and their heads staring backwards. After that, our pygmy goat literally lost his mind and would climb onto our roof at night and just scream until morning, so we ended up having to give him away. We also had a few cats disappear, and one was attacked by something and had a huge chunk of flesh torn off his hind quarters, though he recovered, and all of those occurrences could be explained by any number of wild animals. Our dogs were outside dogs and never had any issue, though, other than the occasional nightly freakout, but that is pretty common.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.